Welcome, everybody, to According to Andrew number 38. What if the 1800s World's Fairs are hoaxes? Um, I've It was something that just kind of occurred to me that a lot of the pictures and stuff that we get from these areas seem very odd, and there's a lot of missing information. And it's just I'm not saying it's definitive, but there it's a question that I haven't seen come up in relation to um, these things before. And the thing that got me thinking about it was the idea that hold up, I lost my spot here. Um, was the idea that we have supposedly all this. It reminds me a lot of like the moon landing stuff, where it's like, well, we did this for a time, and we're never gonna do it again, kind of thing. And there are certainly buildings and stuff like that that show that this kind of architecture and stuff like that that we see at these world fairs was made at some point, right? Stonehenge, pyramids, many of the state buildings with their beautiful craft and stuff like that. But the thing with all of those buildings is we don't know what time period they and under what constraints they were built under. So most of the theories around this stuff, the claim is that these buildings were built in like 2 years, and all this other stuff was going on, and that like they had these thing. It was like kind of a transition of when we knew what these things were, or that they had existed all this time, and then like a purging of all that knowledge. And while that's certainly possible, um, I think that these world fairs are kind of like uh, were were said to have happened but didn't actually happen, and that they were just basically a bunch of all the pictures you see and stuff like that are just little models of and scale replicas of what they planned on building or whatever, and then they're conveniently destroyed afterwards um, to cover up the stuff. The classic thing that you think of is what's his name's the moon landing, or the NASA's quote where it's like, "I'd love to go back to the moon, but we destroyed all that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back." Um, Dan Abbott, I think, is his name. So it's just like, we once upon a time we were able to do this, but we destroyed all the technology to be able to do that, and we can never do it again. Now the big difference is the moon landing was, a 12-year period. This is over like a 50-year period. It takes place in multiple different areas across the entire globe. So this one is more of a stretch. I will give you that. Um, but there are some things where if people were looking back like 100 years from like the moon landing, which I think we just hit the 50-year mark, um, there might be some aspects that get lost to time or other things, and then the only things that are left are some of these images, and maybe something like the idea that we had the technology, and it was this big they went to the moon, but it was then they destroyed all the technology to kind of shove it in their faces, kind of thing, or uh, it was there was a time before and a time after this whole moon landing thing. Just like that kind of art, you can see that argument kind of taking place, and so I think that's something that um, kind of goes in this potential theory's favor. Also, something to note is that the where do I want to start in this whole thing? Okay, so there's a couple factors that are gonna poke a lot of holes in this overall theory. So let's go with the stuff that goes against it. And I'm gonna switch photos here quick. Um, so photos like this are kind of indicative. That's having people modeled there. This There are maybe ways you could explain this. Photoshop of what their version is, but having all that stuff in the background certainly is something. The bigger one, this is just an example of this all this stuff supposedly got burnt down, right? Um, and you have all this lighting and stuff coming in. Um, so okay, so like this faded technique, I think would be really hard to fake, and you'll see that. So okay, so seen in this picture, You have all of these like really tiny little things out way deep in the background of like barely visible faded things. I have a feeling if you were whole cloth making this whole thing, that would be hard to mimic. Now, maybe they have like a whole setup that like when like if this is a I'm like this if this is a miniature set when they took that photo, that's something you get. Also, this building in particular, you'll see another picture of this building later on, but this one with the dome right here is really weird uh, because just the very nature of it makes it look like it's drawn in like every photo I've seen. It's very weird. Let me find. Here's another one where you have like these faded and like flags in the background that you can faintly see and stuff like that. That seems like something that would be pretty hard to replicate. But this is one of the sections of the fair that I believe is potentially not faked, if that's the correct way of saying it. Like the Midway is one of the less extreme aspects of the whole fair. There's always one building that was actually supposedly made. Well, not supposedly. This building does exist, and it was made. This is the main state building. The world. I never really described what the World's Fair was. Um, the World's Fair, and the reason I got into this idea is because Owen had kind of mentioned it on one of his streams, and so I dug into some of the people that he was talking about to see if they had answered this question, and I haven't found it yet. I haven't. There's more to dig, obviously, but so it was basically these huge fairs that happened all across the world in various different areas. The Chicago 1893 one is where basically all these photos come from, and there's these huge complexes, and there was supposedly like 200 buildings built during this whole thing. And here's like a picture of the overall like main plaza type area, and this whole like 1,000-acre complex was supposedly built in 2 years. The whole thing, like planned and built in like 2 years, which is insane, obviously. Um, and it was supposedly made out of very crappy material, and that's why it was bulldozed and destroyed and caught fire so easily over the during the time that it did exist. Um, Most people that dispute that say that that's not possible because of the amount of structural, like how much support that these structures need to have something as large as this. I haven't worked with materials, so I can't really say one way or the other. There's certainly some truth to that, and these buildings don't look temporary. Like if these are all just like basically facades, they are pretty accurate. Let's put it that way. So it was this huge thing, and then they would run the fair. Like I think it took 2 years to build. They ran the fair for 6 months, and then they destroyed the whole thing, except for this building that I had talked about previously. They had a building for like each state had their own building. Each country had their own building. Um, they had these other massive buildings throughout the entire complex. It was a massive ordeal to. There was like 1,000 buildings they had to build, and over this whole thing, they built the Midway. There was a whole bunch of stuff. They had this new technology, electricity, that they showed off at it. And that was, let's see if I can find the one with the lights. So there was like 1,000 lights. Yeah. So this like electricity. This is 1893. So electricity is like a brand new thing. There's supposedly more lights here than anywhere else in the or not anywhere else in the world. There was more lights illuminating this complex than existed in New York at the time, and there's no known power stations and stuff like that in the area. So there's a lot of questions around what's going on with this whole thing, and so one of them is potentially that this thing didn't actually happen. And here's a picture that kind of makes me question that. This building right here, this the one with the dome here, where it's in the background with this kid or whatever. So if you look at some of the foreground stuff, it looks accurate and stuff like that. That thing looks drawn in. It doesn't look right. It's too detailed. There's just something odd about it. But the weird thing is, if we look at this other photo of it, it has kind of that same look. Now, it's not nearly as crisp and defined, and so maybe this one was drawn in and the other one wasn't. I don't know, but there's things like this, not all over the place, but like there's a couple photos here and there that show this, and it's very weird. Um, Also, one thing I've noticed with all these photos is there's no clouds. Notice how in the background it's always just this matte white type color, which I find very odd. Maybe that's normal. Maybe every single one of these photos was taken on an overcast day. I find it odd. Um, Maybe you didn't capture photos with this old technology. Um, then we got this building. This is one that kind of shows that I might be wrong because, I mean, this reflection is pretty accurate. So, you can model up water and get reflections and stuff like that, but this one kind of shows that maybe I am not being accurate, though this might have been one of the buildings that they kept. They kept that main building, and they also kept, there was an art building that they kept that was supposedly not made with all of the flimsy stuff. Uh, and then this interesting photo. So one other interesting thing, let's see if I can find a good photo, is like even in this photo, this is supposedly like an action photo, right? They're trying to stop fires from going on, and people should be running around all over the place. And just think about like when you're trying to take a picture and like somebody moves and stuff like that. Like it's always blurry. So we got this guy that's walking here, and he's a little blurry, but like most of these people are pretty crisp. Not a ton of them are moving, to be fair, but the idea that like in every one of these photos, everyone that's just walking and moving around and doing their thing during the day, there isn't like any blur to them seems odd, right? Like there should be blurry photos here, and you can't tell that it's going to be a good photo or a bad photo till you go back and do a resolution of these things. I don't think you couldn't take like 1,000 photos like we can today to just get that one perfect shot. Um, when you're just kind of hauling this really heavy picture equipment all over the place. Also, there was one thing that kind of makes me think that there was some kind of cover up going on is you had to pay an exorbitant amount of money for the time to be able to take photos there. Who was I listening to? So one of the guys that covers this extensively had said it would be equivalent of paying like $10,000 to go and be able to take photos at the fair in today's money. And that's if you had a camera. And, not everybody's got a camera in their pocket at this time. So that was pretty crazy. This whole thing was supposedly not supposedly, this whole thing, due to the expense of it, was an affair for the rich, the elites of the world. So, we haven't, there's a lot of back alley and weird underground occult stuff that that a lot of these elite types people do. This is in the Victorian era when a lot of that kind of stuff is going on and getting going. Stuff that had been established in the early Enlightenment period has kind of gone full swing at this point. So that's kind of interesting. Let's see, make sure all the buildings are magically destroyed. I haven't been able to find a first-hand account of the fair, so we have like pictures and stuff like that. When I say first-hand account, I haven't found like some random person's journal that says I went to the fair, this is what it was like, I saw this, blah blah blah. Like just some person that like it's just some rando out there that clearly doesn't have an agenda and is just like these things were supposed to be amazing. I went and it was like the time of a lifetime, right? And that's something like if you kept a journal at the time, I get not a ton of people do, and this is like 100-ish years ago, 140 years ago almost. It's you're pushing a lot of it's going to be hard to find these accounts. So in that regard, I understand if there are a ton of these accounts, but also just the idea that there's like, not saying there's not, I'm just saying if one shows up, that would give credence to the idea that these things did exist and that my theory is not correct. There's something that I do find interesting is so you'll have photos of, let me see here. So there's a couple photos like here where you can maybe see like Chicago in the background. I thought I had another one where this one where you can kind of see Chicago maybe in the back. Oh, that's the building. Never mind. This one, here we go. This one, like over here in the background here, that's like Chicago proper, I believe. I haven't been able to locate any photos that are, and I get like from why you might do this, but there's no photos going from Chicago and shooting up towards this direction where you have this like massive thing that like these buildings are really tall for their time. They're massive. They seem to be up on a hill. Like if you're taking any photos from other parts of Chicago, you should kind of catch this stuff in the background. I haven't found any photos with this stuff in the background, which is odd. Now I get it was only around for like 6 months ish, but that's kind of interesting. There are pictures of people working on these buildings in that exist out there, so that's kind of like a mark against this theory potentially. Um, where uh, they're getting like the floors and setting some of the cleaning out the swamp and stuff like that. And but like these other massive buildings are already there. That goes towards the idea that these buildings have been around for a long time and that they simply built stuff around them. Uh, but I don't know. Some of this stuff's kind of weird, especially like one that he had pointed out. This isn't the 1893 Chicago World Fair, but uh, like in Paris, supposedly like they built all these massive structures and then they tore them down and then they built up like a whole new set of massive structures like the next year in like the same spot. And they're different, right? So it's like, if these buildings are these things that have existed forever and existed for a long time in these spots, you can't have different buildings in the same spot over like a very short period of time and also have them be ancient. So that's kind of something that doesn't really jive. This is the first time that photography really exists. They started before photography, but this is one of the first ones that photography is a thing um, in it. And so this is one of the only ones that we have photographic evidence of. So there's 93, and then there's a couple after that, and I believe the last one is like in 1903 or something like that. Or maybe it's 1913. It is basically the last one is slightly before the World War One is definitively the end of these world fairs. Um, I don't remember if they go all the way up to 1913, but there is definitely no more after 1913 in the lieu of what is said to be have been done for these. So there have been World's Fairs since then, um, but they're not quite the same. They don't have these massive fairground kind of things. It's much more tame, much more what would be kind of expected. Um, Apparently, there is some pictures from World's Fairs where there's some weathering, and also trees and mold growing in on and into the buildings. That would take more than a year for that to happen, given that they were supposedly built in this year time frame. So that again goes to the idea that these buildings are very very old, and that these aren't just faked photo type things like I'm saying. um, the construction photos that I talked about, and the 50-year period. Now, the 50-year period is kind of for and against me. So, uh, we supposedly ran NASA missions for 12 years and then never did it again. And then nobody really questions it kind of thing. And same with these World Fairs. We ran it for like a 50-year period and then supposedly never did it again kind of thing. And in a theory, that's a longer period that some other things should happen. But for the overall span of time in which you had really good ways of documenting it, it wasn't just people drawing things because there was no photographic evidence of a lot of this stuff. Um, that the 50-year period is actually probably closer to 25 at the most. 93. Yeah, so to be honest, it's really not that far off of the same time span as like the whole NASA thing. Um, so that's kind of interesting. Uh, Also, supposedly, there's hordes of people coming to these fairs. Yeah, they're mainly rich people and stuff like that, but you can see there's pretty massive crowds and stuff like that. But they're supposedly losing money. Um, Not enough people are showing up and going to the vendors and stuff like that to recoup the money. And that kind of says that nobody actually went to these things, and they were just it was kind of like a fake out thing where they took all the money and then they they claimed to have made X amount or something like that, and it was just kind of like a, what's it called? Not a Ponzi scheme, but basically a way to fraudulate people and siphon money off of the system. What is that term? Anyway, so that's kind of what I have in terms of why I think these buildings, why this kind of stuff exists. If you look at some of these photos, yeah, there's like lots of people here, but you know, I like all these people here almost look like this plant. Everyone's wearing black. It's a Victorian era, so like that's kind of the norm and stuff like that. But it's it's just kind of like you don't have to make these things very distinct. And I have seen some very, very good painters, where you swear that the painting that they did was a photo. So, there's certainly a possibility that some of this imagery isn't real. Let's just say. So anyway, so that's kind of my theory. Basically, to summarize, I think that these world fairs didn't actually happen. That they were fake event to. Oh, I never explained why. So they were a fake event to cover up for the fact that the people at the time started asking questions about all these ancient buildings and how supposedly these things were able to be built and we can't do them in the modern times. So they built all of they created this world fair to create the idea that they could make these type of structures when in reality they couldn't, and these buildings are super, super ancient to cover up some kind of ancient thing. And they ran the spell for, a 50-year period or so, and then they locked it down, and World War One was a convenient way to kind of stop doing it. I think World War One was just kind of a convenience kind of thing. It's like, oh, okay, well now we don't have to run the spell anymore. And from that we have so that convinced people that they were able to make those things, and then they were able to not address the fact that there is these massive, beautiful buildings that existed in these places that shouldn't have existed, and go to speak to a lost civilization that is no longer here. But anyway, that kind of is the theory. That's kind of some of the ideas and some of the evidence. Hopefully you guys find that interesting, and let me know whether or not you think that's a possibility. If there's other evidence that you guys have heard or seen or stuff like that say, no, this isn't possible, that we do have firsthand accounts, or there is some evidence that says there's no way that these could have just been scale models that were photographed, and such things. I'd be really interested to hear what people have to say about this. I thought it was a question that was worth asking. Anyway, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you're listening. YouTube, BitChute, Podbean. And thank you guys, everybody who does listen. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a good day. Goodbye.